Wow. You know what? I think this would be just a good time for me to fade away on my fadeaway party, and just, wow. Thank you, ladies, for that message and song. Incredible blessing. We're glad you're here this morning. NASA posted a job opening a while back looking for someone with expertise in advanced technologies that would require multiple disciplines. A 9-year-old boy by the name of Jack submitted a handwritten resume. And here's what he wrote to NASA. I may be 9, but I think I'm fit for the job. One reason is my sister says I'm an alien. Also, I've seen all the space movies and alien movies that I'm allowed to watch. And I think my parents will soon be giving me permission to watch Men in Black too. Well, no surprise, Jack didn't get the job. But he did get a personal letter from the director of planetary science. And he wrote, Jack, we're always looking for future scientists and engineers to help us. So I hope you'll study hard, do well in school. We hope to see you here at NASA one of these days. I can't help but wonder if a young Jewish girl growing up in the Persian Empire many centuries ago, playing with her dolls, ever dreamed of becoming queen and saving her people. Well, of course, the gal we're talking about today is Esther. There are 2 books in the entire Bible of 66 books that are named after women. One is Ruth, and we just finished a series of messages, Skylar and I did, on the book of Ruth. And today I want to follow up with one message on the entire book of Esther. Esther is an amazing, courageous young woman who made a difference in all of history and even made a difference in your life and mine today, even though she wasn't aware of it. And so that's what we're going to look at today. The opening scene in the book of Esther begins in chapter 1 with an absolute extravagant party that King Xerxes was throwing for anybody who was somebody, and this party lasted 6 months. Have you ever gone to a party, an all-night party, and think you were done in? You probably were when you came home in the morning. This party lasted 6 months. Let's read about it as we pick it up in Esther chapter 1 today. These events happened in the days of King Xerxes, who reigned over 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia. He invited all the military officers of Persia and Media, as well as the princes and the nobles of the provinces. This celebration lasted 180 days, a tremendous display of the opulent wealth of his empire and the pomp and splendor of his majesty. Well, to top it off, after 6 months of partying, they had one final week. And it was like to top all that's been done up to that time during the last 6 months. Let's read about it in the next following verses. Verses 10 and 11, chapter 1. On the 7th day of the feast, when King Xerxes was in high spirits, that's a nice way of saying the guy's pretty much toast. I mean, he's drunk. And so is everybody else there. They have been partying 6 months. This last week, they're bringing it, no holds barred. I mean, everybody's drunk. Because of the wine, he told the 7 eunuchs. Now, guys, that's a job you never want to apply for, okay? I mean, that's a job you never want to apply for. It requires an irreversible surgery that's life-changing. And the king did it so that he'd make sure there was no hanky-panky going on between these guys who would take care of his queen. And so, therefore, he made them eunuchs. Doesn't sound like fun. We do that with our hogs, but I can't imagine it'd be much fun as for a guy. So it names them there. you can see their names, Max, Bob, Harry, Brad. I think that's the name. I'm doing the English versions of them, okay? To bring Queen Vashti to him with a royal crown on her head, and he wanted the nobles and all the other men to gaze on her beauty, for she was a very beautiful woman. Now, there is some debate as to what King Xerxes really was asking of his queen here, of Vashti. And some commentators think he was asking her to come wearing only her crown. I mean, after all, they partied for 6 months. They've had the prettiest women there you can imagine. So how do you top it off? I'll have my queen come out wearing just her crown. Maybe. I don't think you can rule it out. But it doesn't have to be that. Maybe he told her, he said, man, I want you to dress sexy and seductively. Could be. But it doesn't even have to be that way. Maybe he just wanted her to come out. She does the unpardonable. Let's read the next verse. But when they conveyed the king's order to Queen Vashti, she said, drop dead. In that modern version, she refused to come. This made the king furious, and he burned with anger. Now, I think Vashti did the right thing here. Let's just say she was to come fully dressed to the party. She knew that these drunken men would just be oogling and drooling all over themselves, and she wasn't just going to be an object for lust and beauty and treated as just a piece of flesh. She wanted to be treated with dignity and respect and the woman that she was. And she says, no way, king. Well, the king is furious and is angry. Vashti should have been furious and angry for the king even asking her to do this. You know, as you know, I've been preaching almost 50 years, 47 years I've been preaching since my freshman year of Bible college. I've never heard any sermon preached on Vashti. I've heard a lot on Esther. I've only heard one sermon preached on Vashti. And you know who preached it? Not yours truly. My brother-in-law, Jim Dona. He's here today in the second row. I heard a sermon he preached. It may have been here, I'm not sure, but I do remember the sermon on Vashti. You said she had virtue, and she did. She demonstrated character, where she says, whatever it costs me. If it costs me the crown, I'm not going to be a part of this drunken party. Well, she gets thrown out. And the king talks to his advisors when she says no to say, hey, what should I do? These are guys that are paid very well. And here's what they should have told King Xerxes. Man, you made a fool out of yourself. Save your marriage. Go bow down and plead and beg for Vashti to forgive you. And say you'll never treat her like that again. That's not their advice. Their advice was get rid of her and pick a new queen, because all the women in the Persian Empire are going to say, hey, that queen doesn't take orders from the king. I'm not taking orders from you either, Buster, in every household. And they said, we're going to have a social crisis here. And so it doesn't happen. Vashti's gone. We don't know what happened to her. He could have had her executed, but he didn't. I think he just probably had her removed as far away from the court and the king as possible. Maybe just some remote part of the Persian Empire. I don't know. But then they began to have a beauty contest to pick the prettiest girl in the Persian Empire to be the next queen. I mean, think about this. Here's a king who at a drunken party asked his wife to display herself. She says no. And now they're having a beauty contest of all the women in the empire to pick out the prettiest woman in the Persian Empire to be the next queen. Isn't this kind of like a creepy ancient version of The Bachelor? I mean, man, it's just weird, And so we pick it up then in chapter 2 where Esther begins to come on the scene. At that time, there was a Jewish man in the fortress of Susa whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair. He was from the tribe of Benjamin and was a descendant of Kish and Shimei. His family had been among those who, with King Jehoiakim of Judah, had been exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar. This man had a very beautiful and lovely young cousin, Hadassah, who was also called Esther. When her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her into his family and raised her as his own daughter. Now, you got to scratch your head on this one too, don't you? Here's a young girl. Her parents died when she was very young. I don't know if she has hardly any memories of her parents because she couldn't raise herself. Her older cousin, Mordecai, raises her. So she's had some real tragedy in her life to lose both of her parents. Now Mordecai's raising her, and now in this beauty contest, Mordecai thinks it would be a good idea to enter her in this beauty contest to be the next queen to a guy like Xerxes. Guys, let me ask you a question here. If you had a daughter, would you want her husband, your son-in-law, to treat her like Xerxes had treated Vashti? I think I know the answer to that. A sawed-off double-barrel shotgun, man. Yeah. You say, I'll take care of business. No one's going to treat my daughter that way. Yeah, Mordecai kind of makes, I think, a really dumb decision here. And he says, hey, Esther, we'll put you in this beauty contest and see if you become the next queen. And, of course, she's chosen. She's chosen. That's incredible. There's one thing you need to know. Esther is a young Jewish girl, and King Xerxes doesn't know that. And it's to play a huge part in the plot later on in the book of Esther. Well, time passes, and we find that one day Mordecai is out there by the city gate, and he hears two of the guards plotting to assassinate King Xerxes. What would have been your response? Say, good, he's a pompous jerk. He deserves it. I'll be the first to applaud. Who cares? No. He reports it to Esther, and evidently she reported it to the authorities, the Secret Service. I don't know. But Xerxes is not even involved in this. He doesn't even know what happened. But those guys are executed. And it simply says in chapter 2, verse 23, this was noted and recorded in the king's journal. Somebody was a secretary in the Persian Empire writing all the things happening. King wasn't even aware of this one. And it just seems like it's forgotten about. Mordecai's not acknowledged. He's not rewarded. He's forgotten about. Did something good, but nobody seemed to care or pay any attention. But that's not the end of the story, because later on that, too, will play a huge part. Because we're going to get to a point now where a wicked, evil, egotistical maniac, this guy is on an ego trip like you can't imagine. Haman is going to come on the scene. The king, for some reason, gives this guy more power than anybody should be given by the king. In fact, I think he has more power than the king, Xerxes himself. He just takes over. And there begins to develop here a crazy, wild plot where he is going to destroy all the Jewish people, not just Mordecai, who won't bow. Let's push the pause button right here, okay? Think about this. This story of Esther, why am I preaching from it today? Because it's a lot like many of the other stories of the Bible. And I'll guess it may be like your story as well. Maybe you find yourself in a place where you really don't want to be. What about Esther? What about Mordecai? They're not in Jerusalem. That's their home. They had been taken away in captivity by Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, and now they're in the Persian Empire. They're under oppression and slavery. Talk about a hard life. And they're surrounded by some people that are egotistical, arrogant, manipulative. They're surrounded by some really bad people. But they're also surrounded by some imperfect good people who make some really bad, dumb decisions, questionable at the very least, when you look at Xerxes and Mordecai and some of the decisions that were made. Man, here's the lesson. Number one, if you're filling in your outline, this is key. If you got to get this one at this point, because this is what it all hinges on. Number one, even in your broken world, God will begin writing your story whenever you hand him the pen. God will begin writing your story in your broken world whenever you hand him the pen. Esther and Mordecai were not where they wanted to be. But that did not limit God from being able to write his story in their lives and bring purpose and meaning that at the time seemed to have absolutely no purpose or meaning. And this is powerful, because you may be feeling like your life is just broken, a mess, and you're not where you want to be in life, and you're surrounded by people, and you're surrounded by circumstances that are less than ideal. You had dreams 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, but now you have gone as far away from those dreams as possible. Maybe it's even turned into a nightmare, and you think, man, I'm just lost, and I'm just so confused. I just don't know where I'm going. You know, let me tell you about the first time that I went out with this group, the Inspiration Trio that's here today. It was to Cape Girardeau. President Bourne came to me and says, hey, we want college teams going out to churches that are asking for them back then. And he said, why don't you do the preaching? And he says, I'm going to send you with the Inspiration Trio. You'll be going to churches. This Sunday, I want you to go to Cape Girardeau, Missouri. I said, fine, cool. I wasn't really that familiar with them. I knew Pam somewhat, but not very well. We were talking about last night, evidently. And so anyway, Sunday morning, I pull up to the girls' dorm to pick them up. And the three girls come out on time, which is always good, for gals. I'm very impressed. And they came out, and they all three squeezed in the back seat. Where would you girls like me to chauffeur you today? And, so we head off for Cape Girardeau. And not only do they sit in the back seat, they don't talk to me. And I thought, this is going to be a long, long day. They're whispering to each other, and pretty soon they're laughing. And I can see in my rearview mirror that they're looking at me, at the mirror, and they talk, just carrying on. Finally, I asked them, man, what's so funny, girls? They go, we're wondering if you could even preach. I go, oh, that's good. That's good. I said, yeah. A lot of people wonder that. Yeah, okay. So I just drove a few more miles, and I just started laughing, And they go, hey, what's so funny up there? I'm wondering if you girls can sing, and it only took me about 20 seconds to get my answer. The verdict is still out on theirs, I think, but nevertheless, we kept driving, and the road, it widened off, and I just took one. It's 50-50 chance. There was no barricades. I just shoom. That was when 55, I guess, was being built, and we were on it, and we were going fine. We didn't meet a car. We found out why. We came up over a hill, and all of a sudden there's a semi in the road ahead of us dumping rock just in the middle of the road. Big rock pile. I put on the brakes to turn around And that gal in the end that plays this piano so well, Anita. She leans forward, and this is a quotation, okay? I'm not translating. This is a quotation. You want to tell him, Elijah, I think you done took the wrong road. Such perceptive young ladies. I started to turn around and say, how dumb do you think I am? And I thought, no, I don't think I want to ask that question to this group. And so we turned around, and we finally ended up in Cape Girardeau on time. They thought they were supposed to be there to sing. I thought I was supposed to be there to preach. Karen was talking last night, and I had forgotten this part. But what they wanted us to do was to move tables and chairs. They said, can you move tables and chairs? That's what we're going to do before we start today. So we had to move tables and chairs. And then when we got done, we had to move more tables and chairs and put them all back, you know. And we found out they didn't want singers or a preacher. They just wanted somebody to move tables and chairs. Oh, man, what a church. Hey, afterwards today, we got some tables, gals, that need to be put up, okay? All right. They're pros at it, man. They're good. If you need any tables and chairs moved, they're good at it. But things begin to improve. On the way back, one of them actually sat in the front seat. I guess they decided I wasn't a serial killer after all, and therefore I don't remember which one, but one of them sat up front, and we began to talk. And we talked a lot that afternoon at Cape Girardeau, and that's just the beginning of a long friendship. And Sammy and I have been so blessed over the last nearly 5 decades by these gals and their families. Just incredible blessing. But at the time, man, it seemed like, God, this road, it's a dead end in more ways than one. You know, I don't like these girls. They don't like me, you know. But God has a way of taking broken, shattered pieces and lives and hearts and rewriting your story and making something beautiful out of it. Even when you've messed up, even when some of the situations and circumstances that are so painful today are a result of some bad, sinful choices on your part, God's not limited to say, oh, that's the end of your story. Whoa, we're done. Forget about it. It's over. No, our God is so great. He can rewrite your story and make something beautiful out of it, man. He specializes in that, as they sang about. And that's what happens here in the book of Esther. So Haman, he begins to cause trouble. And here we read on. Let's go. Chapter 3, verses 8 and 9. Then Haman approached King Xerxes and said, there's a certain race of people scattered through all the provinces of your empire who keep themselves separate from everyone else. Their laws are different from those of any other people, and they refuse to obey the laws of the king. So it's not in the king's interest to let them live. He didn't just want revenge. He wanted to wipe out everybody. If it pleases the king, issue a decree that they be destroyed, and I'll give 10,000 large scales of silver to the government administrators to be deposited in the royal treasury. Now, doesn't that sound noble of him? Where do you think that money's going to come from? It's going to come from the Jews that he kills, confiscating their wealth. 10,000 pieces of silver. Yeah. Rest of it, he's going to pocket. He's going to be a very rich man, even though it sounds like he's being really generous to Xerxes. Not a chance. Not a chance. Let's read on. So Mordecai finds out about this. They should decree that man, all the Jewish people are going to be killed. So Mordecai sends this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all of the Jews are killed. If you, Esther, keep quiet at a time like this. You think that ever happens to the church today? You think we're ever quiet when God is saying, stand up, speak up, and be my voice crying in the wilderness, make straight the paths of the Lord? Man, he needs it now more than ever. It's no accident that you're here in 2017, here at the end of October. God has purpose and plan, just like he did for Esther. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place. I think sometimes we lose that. God says, I don't need Esther. I don't need you, Mordecai. I can do it without your help. I'm just going to allow you the privilege and the honor of being a part of my team. And it is a privilege and honor to serve the Lord. Deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows? If perhaps Mordecai tells his cousin, Esther, now queen, you were made queen for such a time as this. Oh, I love it. Let's read on. Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast from me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days and night. My maids and I will do the same. Then, though it's against the law, I will go in to see the king. He might look upon her favorably. He may have her executed. But here's what she says. If I must die, I must die. Do you realize how strong? Do you realize what God's telling you and I through that today? Here it is. Second point. Here it is, right here. And here's the purpose of your life. The purpose of your life is to invest your life in something bigger than your life. The purpose of your life is to invest your life in something bigger than your life. That's what God's calling us to do. That's why he called Esther. He said, he says, I didn't make you queen to be comfortable. I said, boy, I got a comfortable life. He doesn't tell her. He says, hey, you know what? You got to look out for yourself, Mordecai says, and just do what you think's best. Everybody's got to take care of themselves first. No. He just doesn't pull any punches. He says, man, you got to come through. Big time. Big time. Here it is. Here's the application of point 2. When courage and comfort collide, always choose courage. Now, that's easy for me to tell you. But I'll tell you right now, it's not easy to do. I like to choose comfort. I like my lazy boy recliner. I like to be comfortable. I don't like to be courageous in a crisis because I don't like crisis. And I don't want to confront people that need to be confronted, that don't want to hear what I have to say. But when courage and comfort collide, always choose courage. Esther did. All of history's been blessed because of that one decision of a courageous young lady. And I'm convinced there's going to be some people that are not going to be saved until you become courageous and become God's man and God's woman and God's voice to be heard in their lives. And you're going to have to get out of that comfort zone. And you're going to have to demonstrate some courage. Okay, let's quickly move on here. Jesus said it this way, whoever wants to save their life will lose it. You live for yourself, you live for comfort, guess what? You lose it all. You don't gain comfort. Hell's not comfortable. But whoever loses their life for me will find it. You got to invest your life in something bigger than you. That's what he calls us to do. Okay, let's quickly move on. That night, the king had trouble sleeping. This is where Esther has a plan now. She's put into motion, where she goes to the king, and he, of course, finds favor. Why, Esther, I'm so happy to see you. What can I do for you? I'll give you half my kingdom. She says, I just like for you and Haman come to a banquet that I'm going to prepare for you guys. Oh, great. And so they do. And Haman is on an ego trip thinking, oh boy, the queen invites me and just the king to this banquet. But when he goes out after the banquet going home, guess who he runs into? Mordecai, who won't bow down and worship him because he only bows down to Jehovah God. And it just grates at him. It just gets to him. And some of his friends says, man, why don't you build some gallows or this wooden contraption about 75 feet high, and why don't you impale him on it or hang him from it, whatever version you're using, as we'll talk about in a moment. He said, man, that's a splendid idea. And so they build this big thing in which the next day Mordecai is to be executed on. Unbelievable. All there are, just a few hours of sleep until Mordecai's life is over. But that night, God's always right on time, you see. That night the king had trouble sleeping, so he ordered an attendant to bring the book of the history of his reign so it could be read to him in those records, and he discovered an account of how Mordecai had exposed the plot of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the eunuchs who guarded the door to the king's private quarters, and plotted to assassinate King Xerxes. Okay, let's read on. So what happens is that as a result, the king says, what's ever been done for Mordecai? Nothing. He scratched. He said, we need to do something. This guy saved my life. And at that moment, that morning, early that morning, here comes Haman in. And he says, hey, I got a question. Sure, king, what can I do for you? King wishes to honor somebody. What should be done to the guy he really takes delight in and he wants to honor? Oh, and then Haman pours it on. You know why? Because he's an egomaniac. He thinks it's him that the king wants to honor. He said, well, he ought to wear the king's clothes. He ought to be paraded around the king's horses. He ought to have everybody acknowledge him and say, this is what's done to the guy that the king wants to honor. It just goes on and on. All these the king says, man, Haman, that's tremendous advice. Will you go out and do it for Mordecai? That's where Haman drops his teeth, and they're not false teeth. You know, I mean, when you talk about a Kodak moment, you know, he does. So much for those gallows and so much for Mordecai being executed. So he does it all day long. That night, Esther has asked him to come back to a second banquet. And the king says, okay. So he and Haman come back a second time. And again, the king says, now come on, Esther, there's really something you want. What is it? Here it is. I ask that my life and the lives of my people will be spared. I just want to live, king. For my people and I have been sold to those who would kill, slaughter, and annihilate us. She's a pretty good spokesman, isn't she? She's a courageous young gal. Let's read on. Who would do such a thing, King Xerxes demanded? Who would be so presumptuous as to touch you, my queen, my wife? How about that guy right there? Let's read on. Esther replied, this wicked Haman is our adversary and our enemy. Haman grew pale with fright before the king and queen. And then the king jumped to his feet in a rage and went out to the palace garden. I mean, he is so furious. He's just got to cool off. Let's read. Haman, however, stayed behind to plead for his life with Queen Esther, for he knew the king intended to kill him. In despair, he fell on the couch where Queen Esther was reclining. I love this scene. You know, he's stumbling over himself. He falls on Queen Esther, who's reclining on the sofa, just as the king was returning from the palace garden. Oh, this is great. Go, let's read. The king exclaimed, will he even assault the queen right here in the palace before my very eyes? Now you're assaulting my queen. And as soon as the king spoke, his attendants covered Haman's face, signaling his doom. Unbelievable. Let's read. Then Harbona, one of the king's eunuchs, said, oh, by the way, King, Haman has set up a sharpened pole. It's debated whether or not it was gallows that hung or whether it's a pole that he hung from, you know, is impaled on. Some more tend to think it was probably a sharpened pole that they were just going to impale him on. Stands 75 feet tall. Is this kind of an overkill? How tall does it have to be to kill a guy and impale him on it? 75 feet tall, in his own courtyard. He intended to use it to impale Mordecai, the man who saved the king from assassination. Well, the last statement's no surprise. Then impale Haman on it, the king ordered. Okay, here it is right now. So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided. Okay, as we take it home today, the last lesson that we want to leave with you is this. No matter how desperate your circumstances, some of you are thinking, God's not hearing my prayers, he's not answering them, I'm running out of time. God's timing is always perfect. That night before Mordecai was to be executed, king couldn't sleep. That was no accident. Do you know something? In the book of Esther, the name of God's not mentioned one time. But in every verse, in every word, you see the fingerprints of God at work in the lives of broken people, in the lives of people who are struggling. And you find God's timing is always perfect. And your hope in the Lord will be victorious. Here's what Ecclesiastes says. I love this verse. Simply says, he has made everything beautiful in its time. Where are you at today? I don't know what you're struggling with, but I can't help but think some of you feel that your circumstances, they're not what you want. You would like life to be a lot more comfortable. And you'd like to have to be a lot less courageous. Let me share with you a story that happened this week. Our daughter Beth is here with the two girls this morning. And Beth called me one morning this week on her way to work. And she said, last night, she said, I started to run again, Dad, because I'm going to be running into, I think it's 15K or something, 9.1 miles, whatever. I don't know all the metrics. But anyway, she has a race coming up. She said, I need to start running, getting ready for it again. And she said, Bellamy, her 6-year-old daughter, said, Mom, I'm going to run with you. Now, you have to understand that 6-year-old Bellamy has done some cross-country running at school this year. She wanted to be a part of it, and she ran in some races. So she's used to some running. But Beth was going to run 2.5 miles that evening. And, she just wanted to get back into the routine, not do too much. And so she let Bellamy go, hope it ain't too much on her. But Beth said, Dad, Bellamy talked nonstop the whole 2.5 miles. Blah, 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 blah. What do you think about this? And she says, she's constantly asking me stuff. And I'm going, I don't know. She says, I'm just struggling to breathe. And Bella's just cruising along, just talking nonstop. Finally, she sees Mom is having more trouble with it than 6-year-old Bellamy's having. And Bellamy says, Mom, you can do this. You hang in there. God gives us big strength to do great big jobs. And I like that. We have a great big God that gives us great big strength to do great big jobs that are bigger than us. And I love it. That's the message of the book of Esther. And so today, some of you, don't throw in the towel. You think, man, I'm surrounded by people I really can't stand, I don't like. And I tell you what, you know what? It's just no use for such a time as this. It's no accident you're here today. Some of you would not be here today if it had not been for some broken pieces in your life. Oh, this trio, they understand broken pieces. They could tell you their own story, how God brings beauty out of the ashes, and how broken hearts and shattered lives and shattered homes. And there are other people sitting by you this morning who could tell you the very same. I found it to be true. But you know what you got to do? You got to take that pen and you got to hand it over to God and say, God, man, it's all yours. It's yours. That's why we have a decision time. And whatever your decision is, the invitation is, God's asking you, And it's not accidental. He's asking you to get right with him. If you've never accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior, you can do that today. If you've already been have accepted Christ, been baptized into him for the remission of sins, then maybe you need a church home, and we invite you to come. This is a great church, and you can make this your family, your home. Maybe you need to just rededicate your life where you're at. Maybe you need prayer, whatever. Will you come? We're going to stand, and we're going to sing. We're going to be singing the communion hymn at this time, and after communion is all served, and after the men have served themselves, we're going to be singing that last verse of, I believe, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross.
When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss, and pour contempt on all my pride. Forbid it, Lord, that I should